Welcome to the Purple Warriors podcast. I'm Ali Sugars, your host, and thank you so much for joining me. This podcast is about raising awareness for domestic abuse by allowing survivors to share their own stories and journeys to recovery. It's also about assisting fellow survivors to give you practical yet powerful information that will help you on the road to your recovery. I hope you enjoy the show. After a conversation with a client a few days ago, I have recognised the need, particularly at this time of year, to speak about the effects that separation and divorce have on our children. Now, this is such an important topic to talk about, and our children are our future. And this time of year in particular, being the holiday season, is when our emotions are heightened and it becomes so much more prevalent than ever that we really need to look after our little ones, or in my case, big ones. So let's talk around the effects that separation and divorce have on our children today. When I first left my children's dad, they were only 4 and 5 years old. I didn't actually think that they would be old enough to remember what was going on and what was happening. But I do remember clearly the effects that it had on them both mentally and physically, as well as their behaviour. And in hindsight, I know now that they do remember much more than what I assumed they did. Yes, I did return to that marriage for a brief period of time, and I have to admit this was one of those occasions where, aside from a lot of outside peer pressure from certain people and certain groups in my life, I returned because I really wanted to try to give my children a secure two-parent home and an upbringing with both their parents in the same house. There was also the element that I had kind of been brainwashed into believing that I couldn't make it on my own, that I couldn't be a good single parent. Choosing to become a single parent is a humongous decision. And it's actually also a decision that a lot of people don't actually get to make because they're forced into it. It doesn't matter how you became a single parent. Let's face it. Either way, it is a bloody tough gig. Am I right? When I left for the second time and the final time, my children were slightly older. They were 6 and 7 years old. And I know I've spoken about this before, but I remember really clearly the day when we were sitting in my parents' lounge room, and it was the day that I'd left their dad, and we were telling the children that we weren't going to live with Daddy anymore. And my son answering, "I think it would be good to have a break from Daddy for a while." You know what? It was at that moment that I realised the true and real effects that this had had and was still having on the two most important people in my life, my children. I tell you, I have shed so many tears over that moment alone, and as I describe this to you, I'm still getting emotional over it, even after so many years. As I said, my children were relatively young, but I've watched them grow into amazing, successful adults, and I can't help but wonder, would they have been different people if things had happened or worked out differently? And I often find myself thinking, what would have happened if I had stayed? Well, you know what? The simple and the awful answer to that is they wouldn't have grown up with a mother. I would not have been able to cope mentally with what was going on in that household, and I most likely would have ended my life. And as many of you know, if you've already listened to my story, I was even on the cusp of doing that at one stage. But here I am, able to share my experiences with you now and hopefully assist some of you with your own doubts and questions. So let's talk today around some ways we can help our children through this truly confusing time for them. And it doesn't matter what age they're at. This is going to refer to them at any age. The number one thing I would say is to talk to them and truly take the time to listen. Now, this is a mistake that I personally made. I don't think that I spoke with my children enough about what was going on with them, even though they were so young. I was, of course, understandably so focused on my own struggles, and I was learning to cope on my own as a single parent. And if I'm really honest, I was actually, I think, afraid to ask them how they were in fear that they were going to tell me that they weren't okay. Don't get me wrong, I did talk to them about how they were, but I don't think that I truly listened. I did put them in counselling, and there was always support for them in the church that we were at. There was support for them at the school they were at. There was, their grandparents gave them great support. So they were getting help and support from people around them. But my job as a mum was more important than ever. Also, when talking with our kids, it's really important to keep it age appropriate. And be careful not to overshare with them from your point of view as a victim. And I hate that word victim, but hear me on this. There is no way on earth I could have had the conversations back then, 20 odd years ago, that I have with my children now. I know that when I speak to them now, obviously I can bring up a lot more adult issues that I certainly wouldn't have been able to do back then, back in the day. But even now, you know what? There are certain things that my kids, they don't need to know about what happened. They don't need to know what went on. I have been asked many times by people how to address issues and problems they might be having with the other parent, and how maybe they're not looking after the children properly when in their care, or there's doubts. You might have heard that something's going on from the children and you're not quite sure how to address it. The number one thing I would suggest is to talk to the children about what's happening for them and how they're feeling about the situation. And if you feel the other parent might be in the wrong, you don't need to talk about this with the children. They're smart little buggers. And if not straight away, if the other parent actually is in the wrong, the kids will figure it out eventually for themselves. Of course, I recognise that there are times when there are a lot of things going on that are wrong in the other household, and reports might become a necessity, and I totally get that. But be sure that you are aware of the consequences and the severity for everyone involved before heading down the track of putting a report in. Be 100% sure that you know it's the right thing to do. A huge point I will make is that, even though it's really difficult and you may really want to tell the kids the whole truth of what's going on, try not to overshare and put your issues onto them. Try not to put them in the middle of any unresolved stuff that's probably going on between you and your ex. This is such a sensitive point to make, especially if, of course, there's custody issues, custody stuff going on. Also, be really careful to speak about your ex in a respectful way, because even though they're your ex, they are, after all, still the other parent. I would suggest that if you can't be respectful, to hold your tongue. And even though we didn't do this very well in the first instances when me and their dad separated, I think that over the years we have both learnt to do this and to speak about each other respectfully and to not put each other down to our children. Because even though our children are adults, we're still their parents, and, as I said, they don't need to know the grown-up stuff that went on between me and their dad. All we're here to do is to work together as our children's parents. And even though they're adults, we'll always be there in that respect for them. So the second aspect of this is keeping an eye on your children's behaviour, particularly the little ones, because often their brains don't know how to express their feelings. They don't even know what's going on in their brains. So they may interpret their feelings in their behaviour. So a child acting out might actually be a child who's crying for help. I mentioned counselling before. If you're feeling overwhelmed and unable to help your children, there is absolutely no shame in taking them to see a professional. And in fact, it may be the absolute best thing for the children because, they're most likely things going on in their little brains that they feel that they can't talk to mummy and daddy about, just in case they upset either of us. But speaking with someone that they trust who's not involved in the ongoing drama of everything, it might help them to relax enough to be able to say what they need to say or express what they need to express in whatever way they can. And therefore, it might help them to deal with what's happening and work on their emotions and hopefully begin their own healing process. A third thing you can do is keep things as normal as possible. Now, I know that things will never be normal again, right? I get that. What I mean by this is, if you can, keep routines as much as possible. Keep normal bedtimes if you can. Take them to school the same way that you always have. Routines. Try to keep up the sports, the dance lessons, the dinners at grandma's, the having their friends over, the family movie nights, whatever you can. Obviously things have changed slightly, but you can still keep a lot of things relatively the same as they were before. If you're in a situation where you didn't have routines, why not create them? This will help the children to feel secure and comfortable in their own house again. A thing that me and my children began were family movie nights. I cannot tell you how many times I watched a Harry Potter movie every Saturday night for years. But I love the movies. And as my children grew older, my daughter and I, we began watching dance movies together, and my son and I used to cuddle up under the blanket and watch scary ghosty shows together. These are amazing memories that we all have. We loved it, and we still talk about them today. Another thing, and an extremely important thing, is to let other people who are involved in your children's care know what's happening with them. In particular, people like their teachers, their school, anyone who's going to be involved in their school care, childcare, church groups, maybe extracurricular groups like sporting coaches and dance teachers. That way, if the supervising adults start to see a change in the children's behaviour or something, if they see them getting upset for what people might think is no reason, they're going to understand why it might be happening. They're going to be able to support them better. And if they feel it's necessary, they can let you know what's been going on. Now, with this, you don't need to disclose all the ugly details of what's happening, just enough to make them aware of the situation and what's going on for the children. So I remember that, I had to obviously tell my children's school, their teachers, what was happening. And from memory, I think all I really told them is that I had left their dad. I think I may have mentioned it was a domestic violence situation. I don't remember, to be honest. But I said that the children, they didn't know it was happening before it happened, and they were kind of in a bit of shock, and everyone's very emotional at the moment. And, I told them where we were living, obviously all the logistics, the change of details and address and stuff like that. But I was very grateful that I could do this because the school at the time were very, very supportive of the children and their needs and their little emotions. So do make sure that you do let the people who have care of your children know what's going on. There is also a couple of websites and phone numbers that I'd like to draw your attention to. Now, the first is parentline.com.au. And the phone number for that is 1300 30 1300. And the other site is kidshelpline.com.au. Or the phone number is 1800 55 1800. Now, these are both really great sites, and both of them, they dive much deeper into, what we've spoken about today in regards to parenting. And the Kids Helpline in particular is a great place to direct the children of any age to, if you feel that they need an outlet to talk to someone other than a parent. You can put the phone number up on the kitchen fridge so they know that mum or dad is fine with them ringing the Kids Helpline if they need to. So as I was having this conversation a few days ago with this beautiful woman who she unfortunately didn't get the choice of becoming a single parent, but she is doing an amazingly fantastic job with everything that's been thrown her way in the last year or so, I started to think about all the incredible single parents that I work with. Although I was reminded of the mistakes that I have personally made over the years, and I got to tell you, there has been many of them, I was also reminded of the amazing accomplishments that I have achieved as a single mum. And I was brought back to the thought of the moment when one of my children, as a teenager, decided that he wanted to go live with his dad for a little while. Now, honestly, I wasn't really all for it, but at that stage, he was a teenager and it was his right to choose. And it was actually what he needed at that stage. So, we gave him that opportunity. But it really came full circle quite quickly without me having to do or say a thing. And after a few months, he decided that he wanted to move back in with me. So I went to help him pick up his belongings from his dad's place. And for some unknown reason, my ex began to yell at me and emotionally abuse me again, which he actually hadn't done for many, many years. But this time, my son saw it from totally a different perspective. He saw it as a teenager, or even he was almost an adult at that stage. And I tell you, I was so surprised when he turned to his dad and he started to defend me. He said that I didn't deserve anything that was being said and that I was a wonderful mother. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't had to do or say a thing. And in that moment, I felt such a range of emotions. I felt vindicated. I was overwhelmingly sad that my son had had to witness this. I was proud of him, but I was also scared of the consequences that he might face for deciding to take those actions at that time. But, it was at that moment that I realised I'd done good. I had raised an amazing man. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that when the time comes for him to be a father himself, he is going to be an amazing one. When my daughter jokes around and tells me, she always tells me, "Mum, you're the cool mum." Or she insists on doing the Christmas baking with me. I mean, my goodness, she's even hosting Christmas this year at her house for our extended family. I look at her and I think again, I did good. She is such a strong, independent woman who knows her own mind, and she doesn't let anyone, let alone men, push her into things that she's not comfortable with. So the bottom line is, I'm not ashamed to say that I done good. I unashamedly say that I did practically single-handedly raise my children, and they are the two greatest successes in my life. And I want this for you too. They say that there's no parenting manual, and guess what? There is no single parenting manual either. All we have is each other for help and advice. Mum, Dad, I know it's tough doing it alone, but don't forget, you are incredible and you have absolutely got this. Never forget though that you don't have to do it all alone. There are so many people in your life who are there and they want to help you if and when you need it, and that includes me. So I say happy, yes, happy single parenting. Now, go and have a glass of wine to celebrate your awesomeness. I hope you enjoyed today's show and thanks for listening. If you would like to share your story of survival or you have a topic you would like to hear about on the program, reach out to me via email welcome@themotivationmama.com or find me, The Motivation Mama, on Instagram or Facebook. And don't forget, the greatest project that you will ever work on is you. Happy day, beautiful.